Welcome to NovoEDTalks, a podcast for authentic, honest conversations about talent development and the people shaping it. On this show, we sit down with leaders across learning and development, mentorship, leadership development, HR, and people strategy to talk about what's really working, what's changing, and what they're learning along the way. These aren't surface-level interviews. They're candid conversations about building skills, developing leaders, supporting managers, and creating experiences that actually move organizations forward. Before we jump in, a quick word about NovoEd. Founded at Stanford's Social Algorithms Lab in 2012, NovoEd is a people-centric talent development platform built for enterprises and training providers. Business transformation starts with people, and people perform better on NovoEd. In today's fast-changing landscape, upskilling requires a new approach. NovoEd makes it easy to move beyond the talent development status quo by combing social, collaborative, cohort-based learning with real-world application. The result is future-ready talent built on a platform designed to turn learning into measurable impact. Now, let's meet our guests for today's NovoEDTalks episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NovoEDTalks podcast, a space for talent development trailblazers to get real. My name is Melissa Fisk. I'm the producer of the NovoEDTalks podcast, and today I am joined by Todd Harrison, who is the Vice President of Global Leadership Development at GE Healthcare. Todd currently serves as the Vice President of Global Leadership Development, where he is focused on leading the design and delivery of leadership development programming for over 8,000 people leaders and emerging leaders across the globe. He has over 25 years of experience as an executive leader in several large global and domestic companies, helping to unlock the potential of leaders at all levels in these organizations. Additionally, he has applied leadership experience serving for 5 years as the general manager at the Corporate Executive Board, leading the Talent Analytics Business Unit, Metrics That Matter, and as a retired lieutenant colonel, having served 23 years of service in the U.S. Army. Todd, thank you for your service, and thank you for joining us today on the NovoEDTalks podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Melissa. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, why don't you start by, just introducing yourself a little bit more, your role and the scope of leadership development you're responsible for today.
You covered most of it in the bio, so I'll just fill in around the edges. So I've been with GE Healthcare for 5 years now. I have worked for a variety of large corporations, from Ascension in direct healthcare. They're the largest nonprofit Catholic health system. I worked with Stryker, a medical device company. So post-military career, most of my work, absent the CEB job, has been in leadership development, in large corporations, in the healthcare space. So it's been very refined, and really I work in healthcare because of the connection to purpose. It's really easy to see how the work I'm doing today with building better leaders directly impacts our customers, and the customers being the physicians, the hospitals, and ultimately the patients that they serve. So that's really inside the company. We have a global footprint, about 55,000 employees in 160 countries. Mine and my team's remit is to really zero in on those 8,500 people leaders and emerging leaders. So individual contributors, we're trying to groom for first-time people leadership. And we do that through a series of leadership academies that are specifically targeted to accelerate the development of our high potential employees. So we have other opportunities. We define leaders at GE Healthcare as anyone, anywhere. You can lead through influence, lead from where you are. So we have opportunities to grow those influence skills in non-direct people leaders. And then we have other more targeted leadership colleges that people can leverage to build and grow their own development. Our remit is specifically around accelerating the development of our high potential talent pool as successors for that next level or larger roles in the company.
That's amazing. There's so much to take away from that. First of all, I love that you find such purpose in doing what you're doing, and that's makes for such a rewarding, not only day to day, but career. So I think that's wonderful. But also, I love that you're saying, leaders can be anywhere. And I think nowadays more and more that's becoming even important with, the development of AI and everything, and which we'll all get into. But as we're heading into uncertain times, I think, your next great leader could really be anywhere. So that I love that you have such a diverse kind of portfolio of programs. But why don't you talk a little bit about
about who these leaders are, who your learners are, and what some of their biggest pressures and challenges are that they're facing right now.
Yeah, I lean back on an old military term that's become very popular in the business world called VUCA. All of our leaders at every level are dealing with an environment that is volatile, it's uncertain, it's chaotic or complex, and it's very ambiguous. That changes the dynamic of people who are people leaders, constant change, very unclear. The old days of having a clear path and moving from one stage to the next in change, it's a constant state of change. So it's changing the nature of what we focus on with our leaders, and it's a little bit different at every level. So the groups we work with, again, is all people leaders, but we target and focus our leader development efforts specifically for each of those levels. So, how we approach growing future people leaders at that emerging leader level is different than how we address frontline leaders, mid level leaders, executives, and senior executives. Everything they get and what we do is designed to give them what they need to lead in context of what they're living today. So, being able to handle constant change, being able to think on their feet and be decisive in the moment without all the information to make a decision. It's never enough, but you have to be comfortable using good enough in making decisions and being able to pivot from whatever outcomes come from that. So in those levels, I think it's kind of the common theme that we're focusing on each level, but the way we address it is more level based because they deal with it different challenges in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. That's brilliant. And so, what we need to be seen right now, right? That's matching that's reflective of where we're at right now in, in society and in the workplace. So I think that's so important and incredible that you're really approaching it that way. And how cool that you're, pulling on your past military experience to kind of do that. I'm sure it's not as
That was
intense as being in the military, but still very important to be able to be adapting on the fly, especially in the space that you're in too.
I mean, if you boil it down with what we're trying to create in all of our leaders is the ability to make sense. Sense making is a new skill that's kind of emerged that's become really important because when you don't know what's going on, it's our job as leaders to help make sense in the moment of what's going on in the context and what we need to do differently to address the context in the moment. So it's very fluid, right?
Absolutely. And I love that. Like it's almost like the sense making term that you applied there, right? It's almost simplifying it, but that is
Mhm.
so important and something that we all really need to focus on being able to do and having our leaders be able to do.
Right.
So that's great. I love how you explain that. If you picture the ideal state of leadership development at your organization, what does that actually look like in practice?
So I'm going to answer that in two ways, Melissa. I mean, in our organization, as I kind of alluded to, we approach it everybody as a leader. So within our global L&D team, which I have two peers that I work with, they provide different solutions for the broader audience of leader development. And we believe as part of how we need to think about leader development is you need to be inclusive of everyone. You can't, if you narrow in and you only focus on one group, then it's disadvantaging others who may need those skills. So they focus on the more broad-based leadership skills that are needed. And then I'll talk specifically about my remit with the Global Leadership Academies. It's really what does ideal look like for developing in a very fast, accelerated pace the skills, the proficiency, the mindset for our future talent at different levels in the organization. I go back on, and this is 20 years of learning and experience that, two fundamental concepts. So there's a concept called the leadership pipeline. It was published in 2000 by Ram Charan, Stephen Drotter, Jim Knoll. And that's been a foundational concept of the ideal state I've carried through multiple organizations that says, whatever level you're in, when you change to the next level, there's a fundamental transition that you need to go through to change your mindset. Where do you spend your time now versus where you spent your time before? What skill sets do I need that are different that made me successful before? And where do I get the tools that help me be so mindset, skill set, tool set changes at every level. So as an example, if I'm an individual contributor, I'm very heavily focused on technical skills. That's what makes me successful, is being highly proficient at delivering on my technical job. When I move into frontline leadership, my job is now about getting that work done through others. I still need to have technical skills, but my job is much more relational, humanistic skills to get the work done through others and leading. I need to have a little bit of critical thinking and strategic skills to understand more about the business. That concept plays as you move up the organization, but the ratio of those skills, technical skills, become less important the higher you get because you have plenty of technical experts working for you.
Yeah.
Relational skills become very important at every level, but the amount of strategic thinking, critical thinking skills increases as you get into those senior level roles. That's called the Strataplex model. It overlays the leader index. Not to get too academic, that's the byproduct of my doctoral education. But those
I
two
love
fundamental concepts have underlaid everything around the ideal state. As we
it.
develop leader development, we need to keep in mind people have different needs. They need to have a different mindset as they progress to higher and higher levels in the organization.
No, absolutely. And I love the importance of the relationship between all of those, right? Because having the mindset to really be able, like the adaptable mindset to really be able to switch from having a technical skill set day to day, switching to a very like human skill set day to day is
Right.
such a huge shift, and maybe sometimes I think at larger organizations we like underestimate the big change that is and the work that needs to be done around that to help the individual. We don't tend to focus on that as much. It's just like, "Oh, you can do this, so now you can handle these people,"
Right.
right? And it's very,
Yeah.
very different.
The
So,
the biggest challenge in every organization I faced, even here at GE Healthcare, is you're promoted on your past successes, which are initially technical success. And what we're building into our system of creating the ideal state is a transition onboarding. When you move to a next level, it's kind of stop, don't pass go, don't collect your $200 until we talk about how do you need to be thinking differently? How do you need to be acting differently in this role that's different? Because now definition of success has changed.
absolutely. So, you're kind of teeing me up for my next question, but what is the biggest gap between, this ideal state and where
Mm.
you're currently at, and how are you kind of closing that gap right now?
Yeah, I really think it is that mindset, organizational mindset around that there is a difference. Traditionally, and even still today, after 40 years in this business, companies still think very, I guess, vanilla about their leaders, that everybody needs to be, know, and do kind of the same thing to be successful. That's why these two concepts are very fundamental. And I see it here. So getting the organization and our internal gap, we didn't have leader development for about 6 years as we were going through the transition and spinoff, was people were promoted on technical skills. So we have leaders who still rely heavily on technical skills and not so much those humanistic skills that are needed to be successful getting work done through their teams. Byproduct of that is they're burning out because they're
Yeah.
shouldering the load on everything. So how we're addressing the gap is really spending time building in those transition moments to help them understand what's needed now. The old
Yeah.
Marshall Goldsmith, what got you here won't get you there mindset. We need to tell them what's going to get them there
Yeah.
um, in the future. So building the system so that it focuses on that mindset skill set shift is really how we close the gap.
I love that, and you brought up something that's so important, and almost like a little bit vulnerable for organizations to do, right? And that's say, "Hey, we didn't have a leadership development program for this many years, and these people are now in leadership roles based off of how we did things before. We need to work on that." And I
Right.
think even that awareness is so powerful. So I love that y'all are doing that. How are you designing leadership experiences to ensure that learning actually sticks with these leaders? How does that actually translate into behavior change? What do you do to make sure that happens?
Yeah, I promote with my team and with the organization. I call it my three-legged stool metaphor, right? So I think there are fundamental components to how we design our leadership framework, and we look at it as an ecosystem. So we're looking at this underpins the design and delivery of all of our academies. The first leg of this, and this all kind of will answer your question eventually, is around self-insight and assessment. We believe leaders need to understand how to lead self and understand themselves before they can lead others. So at every level, we provide lenses into their self in two ways. I call them signs-based assessments, which are your typical Hogan, your MBTI, DISC, EQ. They're based on preferences and personality, and that gives them one way to look at themselves. But then we also layer in multi-rater feedback tools on our competency assessments, which are right-sized by level. Those are behavioral-based, proficiency-based, to give them another lens of, okay, where are my strengths that I can leverage, and where are the flat sides that I either need to work on or I need to find somebody on my team that can round out what's needed. We believe firmly that leadership is a team sport. So while no leader is going to perfectly match that competency model, their job is, here's where I contribute to the organization, and here's the team I built to really round out what's needed for success at that level. So that's the assessment piece. The middle piece, which is a big shift for our organization. We have a legacy from GE's Crotonville, which was world renowned leader development, best practice institute, right? So we
Yeah.
had to live up to that. We lost access when we spun off GE. So big remit. One thing that the legacy of Crotonville and my studies around neuroscience of learning and figuring out how do people really learn, we went from the intensive 1 week session in person on campus to moving to more of a distributed learning journey model. That middle leg is all around how do we distribute the learning so that, using a healthcare term, we're dose speeding the skills so they have time to gain new insights into what do they need to build. They have time to practice to prove to themselves they can do it. And then we build in the mechanisms for them to take it back to the job, continue to practice it until it becomes habit. And that's where the results come from. And then we move to the next skill. So all of our journeys are multi-month journeys for every level so that we can give it to them in a way that they can consume it, absorb it, turn it into habit, and then bring it all back together at the end in some sort of capstone simulation or event that allows them to see how they all hang together. So that's the critical middle leg. And then the third leg is what I call our force multiplier, pulling another military term, and that's coaching makes everything happen back on the job. So we provide at every level coaching support to our participants in the academies. At the emerging leader, frontline leader level, that's more of a coaching platform. They can access a live coach, but it may not be the same coach every time during and after the program. So that's designed to help in that transfer of learning. You get it in an event, it may not have exactly the context, but that coach can help you contextualize and apply it back on the job. So that, and then it gets to be more assigned executive coaches as we get to our higher level programs. But those three, we feel if any one of those is out of balance, we're going to suboptimize the outcomes of our leaders. So we've built our academies to leverage all three in kind of a balance, and we're starting to see the byproduct of that with the leaders we produce from each academy.
That's amazing and brilliant. And what a great breakdown for our listeners of just like a very kind of tactical, strategic approach that you can take. So thank you so much for sharing that, Todd. I think that's so valuable for folks. And I love what you said about, coaching as a force multiplier, and kind of what you added in there was the context, is that the coach can add context to individuals. And why I think a lot of times we hear like coaching or mentoring and we're like, what does that really bring like to the table?
Right.
And it's so
Right.
powerful, and I think so underutilized at organizations. So I love that you pointed out there an added context to the coach, and that is that the coach's responsibility is to add context to the individual, which I think is really powerful, and I think an underutilized tool for organizations. So that's brilliant. We've been talking a little bit about skills earlier on, those technical skills versus humanized skills, I think you
Right.
call them. And there's definitely been this shift right now, to more what we've heard called durable or power skills, things like judgment, decision making, adaptability. How is your team thinking about developing these capabilities a little bit more? And I know we kind of touched on it earlier on, but could you expand upon that?
Yeah, and I'm going to be a little provocative and push back on you. I don't think these are new skills. I think they are re-emergent skills. For the last 40 years, those have all been
Mhm.
critically important for leaders to be successful. They
Mhm.
went out of vogue, they weren't focused on, and it's because they're so difficult. I mean, these are difficult skills to build. The way we're kind of addressing them in our design is through these simulations and experiences, capstone experiences, where they're pulling all of the other skills together. But then that's also where the coaches come in, applied judgment, applied decision making. We want to give them a safe environment where they can practice that, and then they get feedback on it throughout the simulation before they go back in the real world. But it's really highlighting the importance of those power skills. But I would say they've always been critically important. They have just been overcome by other things.
Sure.
But if you look at the definition of a successful leader for the past 2,000 years, judgment, decision making, those are all critical skills. We just need to bring them, you can't teach them in a formal class. So we have to bring them through a variety of experiences and support with the coaching and simulations.
Absolutely. I love that. Talking about, leadership development a little bit more and how, you've evolved and come to, your whole three-legged stool system that you have, how is your approach to that kind of evolving to meet the demands of the business in today's environment?
Yeah, a lot of it. Obviously, you can't go a day without hearing about artificial intelligence. So there are applications for artificial intelligence, and I think they're positive things that we've had difficulty applying in leadership development that AI can really supplement and help. And that's in that transfer of learning. It's in making things more efficient, teaching our leaders around how to do their job more efficiently and effectively leveraging AI to create the room for doing the other things that they say I don't have time to do. That's really important for leaders. Things like having one-on-ones, having development conversations, right? So we're starting very early stages of helping reduce the fear of AI in our academies by showing them how, giving them prompts to go out and look at their assessment results from their Hogan assessment or their competency assessment and get initial feedback on what it says before they go into a coaching conversation around unpacking that, right? So we're trying to reduce the fear of AI is our initial goal, as well as build in more practice exercises. So the common role play in training, we do that with AI now and get them that way when they go back to the job, they are already comfortable using the tool to help solve problems without having to go flip back through a binder or think back to that role play they did in class. It's a help in the transfer of learning type of mechanism. I think that the newest thing that we added this year around the simulations and the capstone experiences is also kind of new and helping our leaders in taking away more than just the head knowledge, because it's allowing them to see, okay, we've strung out a 6 month journey. You're getting these things one at a time. We don't want to leave it to chance that they understand how to knit it all together into something that raises the sea level of their leadership ability. So those exercises have been really important in bringing it all together and putting a bow on, now this is what's next in terms of how you change the way you do work and get different results. I don't know if I strayed from your question, but that's what comes to mind.
No, that's brilliant, and I think it makes complete sense for because we're talking about how leadership development is evolving in that question. So
Right.
that's great. Todd, I'm going to get back to AI because obviously AI is everywhere and I want to get more into, how you're using it. But before we switch gears to AI, I want to talk a little bit more about coaching because you've brought it up a couple of times and how it's an important part of your leadership development programs. So could you talk a little bit more about how you're utilizing that?
Yeah, so we're very careful about how we define coaching because we find in the the end user's mind it gets muddled with mentoring or different things. So we talk about coaching is this is designed to help you be even better version of yourself. It's not somebody giving you answers. A mentor can help give you suggestion and answers, but it's very much Socratic, helping you learn to think about what you need to do differently and try different things and process different things in a safe environment. So that's kind of how we're positioning coaching, and coaching kind of had a bad rap in our organization. It was always associated with progressive discipline or a performance improvement plan. So we're trying to get past that and get people to understand this is something to make you even better, an even more effective leader regardless of how effective you are. This can help take you to the next level. So we provide it within our academies to help uh, show what the value and benefit of coaching is. And many times we get the request then, can I keep my coach? Can I continue working with them once they see the value? And then we've set it up in the organization, and I manage then outside of our academies the executive coaching process so that people can get coaches to be better, right, as they have need. Mentoring, we have separate programs, not built into our academies, but we have a system where people can identify what is it that the thing they want to be mentored on, the subject, and then the matching system that allows them to find internal people that can help work with them on that.
That's awesome. I love that. And I like how you've defined the difference between the two. And when you were talking there about coaching, though, I always think about the quote. I don't know the exact quote or who said it, but how, you know, if you look at any professional athlete, they have coaches and mentors like throughout
Yeah,
their entire career. So even when they're the best of the best, they still have a coach and a
right.
mentor. That mindset really helps people be like, oh, yeah, yeah, I do need this. I do want this.
And once they experience the success and the feedback we're getting from them, they're actually quantifying where and how and how much dollars it's either contributed to the organization or saved based on that experience. So we can put an ROI on that coaching experience as well.
I'm so glad you said ROI because my next question is
Yeah.
how are you measuring whether leadership development is actually working? And do you have any kind of like key signals that you can really look at to see that leaders are growing and applying what they've learned?
Yeah, so the business I ran was a talent analytics company, so very near and dear to my heart in capturing metrics. So it's always been the holy grail of learning and development, leader development, to try to attach what we do to specific organizational outcomes. Most of those are hard to get, and the ones we can get are very distinct lag measures, right? They come well after the intervention of learning and development or leader development. So the process that I've used for 20 years that's worked well enough, I call it the good enough approach, is a predictive analytics survey approach. And it's based on the thought leadership of the people we all hear: Don Kirkpatrick, uh, uh, Jack and Patty Phillips, Josh Burson, Robert Brinkerhoff, all these thought leaders in how do you measure the impact and ROI of learning. And they consulted with us on creating a survey, series of surveys that we give immediately following each event and then after the academy program completes. And it's based on different levels of impact. Are they satisfied? Did they learn? Did it have an impact on their job? Did it have an impact on the company? The reason it's predictive is the way the questions are structured. It gives us kind of a directional sense. Is this working? But that's not good enough. So 90 days later, we follow up with a similar survey to them and their manager as a reflective survey, answering similar questions, but looking back. And that trues up then, okay, we know directionally this is kind of working. Now we have a better idea of what's working. And there's a concept called scrap learning. We know what's not contributing to outcomes, and we can make adjustments to the way we deliver in what we deliver to reduce that scrap, right? Transfer learning. So that's a very mechanical, scientifically based approach to gathering data that's good enough to make decisions and get a sense. And we even have the ability to quantify that and turn it into business language, right?
Yeah.
Our business leaders don't care whether an instructor got a 4.5 out of 5. But if we can say 90% of the people who completed this academy said they were able to take what they learned back to the job and it made a difference to their business, leaders will take that at face value because it's the power of mass feedback, right? So that's the more mechanical approach we use. The simple measure, Melissa, that here we use is we have a very small budget, operating budget. We charge back for all of our academies for the last 3 years, and every company's feeling the inflation pressures, tariff pressures. Now we've got the war that's creating dynamics in the macroeconomic marketplace, yet our leaders are still investing in sending their people to our academies. There's not been a drawback on that because they've realized the value they're getting in return. So that's a soft ROI, but I think a really big measure that gives me a sense that, okay, we're doing the right things as long as they're willing to continue to invest. And we ask the individuals a very simple question: was the time you spent in this academy worth all the things that were not getting done back on the job? And we look at that as another kind of direction metric.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's great. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us, Todd. I think our listeners are really going to appreciate that, especially because, a lot of times the answer to that question is, oh, we use surveys and do this. I love how you explained how you use surveys. And I think that could be applied by so many learning and development leaders here. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah. Hopefully AI will give us more real data later.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
until the good enough approach tends to satisfy business leaders
Yeah.
that it's working.
Speaking of AI, switching back to AI, you mentioned, that you're using AI to do some role play in some of your leadership development programs. How else are you using AI in your strategies?
Yeah, we're testing out some agents, generative AI agents around coaching. So we've done some comparative studies to see, does coaching using this generative AI tool on their desktop, what kind of results does that produce? What does it produce when you attach it with a live coach as well, or just a live coach alone? Still early days on getting the feedback, but it's
Sure.
looking like the combination of instantaneous on the job support through generative AI prompts and agents works, but you put it together with a live coach who is not always available in the moment, then you start getting that multiplier effect from AI. It's the human plus machine learning, which somebody gave a phrase to me that I absolutely love, because I still push back when I hear people say machine human. I said human first
I
and
love that.
foremost. But the term I heard is that hybrid intelligence, creating hybrid intelligence by the marriage of human and machine appropriately. And that's kind of how we're starting to leverage AI, is how do we increase the intelligence of the human by making their job easier and allowing them to focus on the higher order judgment, critical thinking skills, those power skills that they need to, and not get caught up in the whirlwind of day to day, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think just how you explained it is a scenario that everyone can relate to, right? Where it's whether you're on using some piece of software or whatever, and of course there's an AI chatbot there, and you're like, hey, how do I do this? And
Yeah.
sure, most of the time you can get your answer, but then you have a more complex situation, and you really in that moment long for the human part aspect of it, where it's like, no, I need to explain this to you and why this is happening.
The other piece, if I could kind of expand, it's a little bit beyond your question, but an emerging issue in leader development that started to come out in some of the current research is that a lot of our younger generation workers have no interest in being a formal people leader. So our pool
Interesting.
of future people leaders is shrinking. And the reason explained why they don't want it is, I don't want to work as hard as that person, my boss or their boss's boss. So where I see AI coming in is they're going to be digital natives. They can learn how to use it more efficiently to solve the problems as a people leader. But it's also, that's why we spend so much time training our current leaders to use it, because it's a survival tool. Honestly, it helps them be more efficient so that they can focus their time where it needs to be. There's a fear factor, but we're trying to work through and really see it as solving a bigger issue down the line, that it can help. I don't like the term work life balance, because it's work life integration, right? It helps in taking care of the things that can be taken care of and allowing us to focus on the things that actually keep us resilient, keep us healthy, keep us focused on what's most important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've really realized that in my day-to-day work where AI has like allowed me more time to do deeper thinking, which I think is great. But talk a little bit, you just touched on a lot of different things, this relationship between technology and human, or rather, as you call it, human plus technology, or human and AI. How are you, and I love that you brought up the different generations too, because there's a lot to navigate there, right? How are you navigating between, efficiency and who considers what to be more important to make things more efficient, and then also balancing that with deeper development so that you're making sure people understand those bigger human, you know
Mm.
strategies that they need to understand, which is balancing judgment, connection, and confidence.
That's really the big debate right now in AI, right? In the application. Are we dumbing down our people, all of us, by allowing it to do too much? So it goes back to that comment I made about sense making. The human aspect of AI is making sense of what it's telling us. We can't, and what we teach our leaders at every generational level is, don't get so over reliant on it giving you the answer. Use it almost in the mindset of crowdsourcing. It's a supercharged crowdsourcing tool that can give you a lot of ideas, but you still have to figure out, how do those ideas apply to the context I'm in? That's the human skill that can't be replicated by AI. So whether it's a digital immigrant like me who's trying to learn this stuff along the way, or a digital native like our younger generations, you can't become over reliant. The human aspect of understanding what it's saying and how it applies is where we need to spend our time in leader development. It's really where I think we need to go in the future. But that's the concern, is that we're going to allow it to become our judgment, allow it to make our decisions, and those power skills are still super important, and maybe why they're coming back in vogue.
Right.
Is there's a danger of losing them even more if we get too over reliant on AI.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Talk a little bit before we move on from AI, talk a little bit more about that, like how you're setting into practice, guardrails or rules or regulations around how people are using AI to make sure that, AI really is enhancing efficiency, but not replacing, the really important human context that you need to apply.
Yeah, I wish I could say we have it figured out. It's early days, right? I mean,
Yeah,
everyone is trying to figure out what that looks like. We
right.
are, from a company standpoint in HR, going through a massive transformation to help define the guardrails and who does what, and where does AI become a digital fabric and an enabler. But where do we still need that most human aspect of HR? In our development, it's really just kind of pulling them back, and you know, I don't want to say it's akin to watching for plagiarism, but it's making sure that people are not just taking that and using it without pushing back. And I keep coming back to the coach. It's so
Yeah.
important to have coaches, because a coach can say, okay, well, why is that important? How did you take that and apply it to what you're doing, as opposed to just saying, oh, good job, you used AI to get the answer. Guardrails and governance are still really kind of fluid,
Yeah.
ambiguous. In our organization, we're trying to make sure that everything we do keeps the, you have to think. There has to
Yeah.
be critical thinking about how you're using it, but be smart, but explore, find out
Yeah.
where it can help you. But don't let it take over all your decisioning and driving what you do. That's a purely human skill that's still needed.
Absolutely. I love what you brought up there, though, was just talking about how you're utilizing coaching a little bit more than like guardrails and regulation, which makes sense because if you think about it, guardrails and regulation and rules like that takes time to
Right.
develop. And with everything moving so rapidly, it's like, no, you just need someone to be like, no, this is what you need to do this, push back on this, keep the
Right.
human element. And you need someone telling you that in real time as you're starting to use these tools.
Is moving so quickly, we get a quick answer, we move on. So the coach
Right.
is double check, just
Yeah.
say, hold on, stop. Tell me your thought process on how you're using this and why you used it, just
Right.
to get them to critically think and not just take it and move.
Todd, as we wrap up here, this is my favorite question to ask. As you look to the next few years, what do you believe that leadership development leaders need to unlearn, and what do they need to double down on?
I am really, really, I've been around long enough that everything old is new again. And I'm really concerned about all the new books that are coming out that talk about traditional leadership development, which is an autocrat, leadership is autocratic, top down, which is still very prevalent. I think we need to think differently as leadership development, that while that's still prevalent out there, it doesn't mean we can't do things differently. So, what needs to be unlearned is this whole programmatic mindset that still is pervasive in leader development. We use the excuse that, well, I don't have the money to do anything more. I throw the red flag on that. You can get creative. We did. We sold it to the business and we let them fund it. But think about it more holistically as an ecosystem, not just a collection of programs or that's only for a small audience. If you think about it as an ecosystem, then you're thinking about how do we raise the entire C level of our leadership, not just for one group. Because the response we get when we focused on one group is, oh, this is great, but what about my boss? Or what about them? Can you give it to them? So if we think about it holistically, leader development practitioners need to get away from the programmatic mindset. And that also includes moving more into contextual experiences built into the formal part of the program. So the simulations, the work projects that help them tie what they're learning to real work in their life. I don't think I see enough in the programs. We need to unlearn that it's all bring them somewhere, virtually or in person, dump everything into their head, send them back to work, and hope they can take what they learned and apply it. So we need to unlearn some of that traditional mindset of it's got to be event based, build in more experiences, leverage AI, and put it in context so that it's not. My favorite saying is we need to reduce the mental gymnastics they need to go through to apply what they're learning back on their job.
That's a really, really powerful thing that I think we can all relate to and certainly take back into our work.
Yeah.
Todd, to close, what's one lesson that you've learned as a leadership development leader that you wish you'd known earlier in your career?
Yeah, I love this question. And my response to it is you really don't understand how to be a leader until you've been a leader. So, my recommendation to anybody getting into leadership development is volunteer to go lead somewhere. And that doesn't mean leading a 3-person leadership development team. I'm talking about, a crucible leadership assignment. The best one that I recommend is go out and volunteer at a not-for-profit organization. You want to learn leadership skills? Go lead people who don't report to you and have only the purpose of the organization as their focus. And the reason I say that is I spent 10 years in my early career doing leader development thinking I knew what I was talking about. And then I took over that job running a P&L for 5 years and I went, holy smokes, that's what I was talking about. It put the context and it put it in real life. So my recommendation is step outside your lane and go get that experience. You can always come back and you're better for it. And the added byproduct is it gives you credibility with the leaders you're talking to and trying to develop.
Yeah.
You have that lived experience, shared experience, right?
Absolutely. My husband is in construction, and he always references that the project managers he works best with are the guys who actually have
Had
done
done.
construction. Todd, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the NovoEDTalks podcast today. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge here. I think our listeners are just going to find so many gems in this conversation that they can take away and apply to their day-to-day. So thank you so much for joining us on the NovoEDTalks podcast.
Thank you for the opportunity. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of NovoEDTalks.